They aimed the blowtorch at her back, expecting screams, expecting her flesh to melt and her resolve to crumble. But when the flames died and the smoke cleared, she stood untouched. No scars, no burns, not even a blister. And that was the moment they realized they had no idea what kind of weapon they'd just tried to destroy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The cell was dark, but not empty. Heavy boots echoed on concrete as a woman named Didn was dragged into the room, wrists chained behind her back. Her clothes were torn, caked in dust and dried blood. She hadn't eaten in 3 days, but the fire in her eyes, ancient, otherworldly, still burned. They called this place the Silo. Officially, it didn't exist. An underground facility buried beneath an abandoned uranium mine in northern Karelia. It was rumored to be a repurposed Cold War torture chamber, bought, sold, and now operated by a nameless private group. Mercenaries, biotech hunters, shadow contractors. No one ever got out of the silo, except Kayla. The men who held her weren't amateurs. They were hand-picked specialists, trained in psychological dismantling and enhanced interrogation. But what they didn't know, what no one outside a vanished file in a dead archive knew, was that Didn wasn't supposed to exist anymore. And yet, here she was, alive, silent, smiling. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Still not talking, huh? Said one of them. He was called Bishop. A former NATO asset gone rogue, now a specialist in deep reclamation, a term that meant breaking people without breaking their bodies. He clicked the igniter of a small industrial blowtorch and watched the blue flame sputter to life. We've tried kindness, starvation, isolation. Now we try fear, he said to the others. Kayla didn't blink. She looked at him like she was observing something less evolved than herself. Bishop walked slowly behind her. You were found near the Arctic boundary. No ID, no thermal signature. But your DNA came up flagged in a 1977 Blackthorn file that doesn't even have clearance codes anymore. Who are you? She remained silent. He crouched, lit the blowtorch, and pressed it against the center of her back. Nothing happened. No screaming, no struggle. No skin bubbling or peeling, just the hiss of fire against something. Her shirt disintegrated in patches, smoke curled around her shoulders, but her skin stayed pristine, pale, smooth, unmarked. Bishop stepped back. What the? Kayla turned her head slowly. I told you, she said, voice calm, laced with a chill that wasn't human. You're not the first to try that. The room fell silent. Another man, Reyes, stepped forward and examined her back under a beam of white light. He touched it with his glove. It's cool, he said, more to himself than anyone. Not even heat reddened. Bishop's voice cracked. What are you? Kayla leaned forward, resting her chained hands on the table between them. I'm what you left behind when you burned down the village of Yerk 4, she said, and I'm here because I remember. Reyes blinked. That village was wiped out in '98 by rebels. Kayla tilted her head. No, by your employer, Project Halo, and I wasn't the only survivor. Bishop's eyes darted to the one-way mirror behind Kayla. He knew someone was watching, and that someone wasn't going to like what they'd just heard. Outside the room, in the surveillance bay, a woman in a gray coat stood with arms crossed. Her name was Dr. Elira Nix, head of the behavioral program at Blackthorn Neurogenics. She'd seen anomalous cases before, men who could lift cars under duress, women who could survive hypoxia for hours. But this? Skin that rejected flame? A memory untouched by trauma? A subject who shouldn't exist? She picked up the phone and dialed the internal override. Prep Chamber 6, full containment. Move the subject. Inside the room, Kayla looked up. You might want to hurry, she said, smiling faintly. They're coming, and they're not here to ask questions. The lights flickered. A hum rose from the walls, a deep, low-frequency vibration. Somewhere far beneath them, the backup generators rumbled to life. Reyes took a step back. What's going on? Kayla closed her eyes. In her mind, a door opened, one she'd sealed shut years ago in order to survive. The scientists at Project Halo had called her Subject D4. They thought they'd purged the anomaly when the facility was wiped. They were wrong. The fire that should have destroyed her had fused with something dormant inside her DNA, something ancient, something designed not just to survive, but to evolve under pressure. Now, for the first time in over 2 decades, Kayla Dorn was ready to stop running. And the silo was about to burn. The alarms were subtle at first, just a distant chime, low and rhythmic like a heartbeat underwater. But the red strobe lights that flooded the hallway didn't lie. The silo was in lockdown, Protocol Alpha 6. No one in, no one out. Bishop slammed a button on the wall. "What the hell is going on up there?" he shouted, voice crackling into the intercom. Static. Kayla was still seated, wrists chained, expression eerily calm. Her skin unmarked from the torch, her body perfectly still. Yet somehow, it felt like she was the one orchestrating the chaos outside. Reyes turned back to her, nervous now. "What did you do?" Kayla tilted her head. "I remembered." Bishop drew his pistol. "Don't play games." Kayla's eyes flicked toward the ceiling as the hum intensified. Not a noise, but a vibration, mechanical at first, but now layered, resonant, almost organic. Like something deep below was waking up. She whispered, "They buried it too close to me." Bishop stormed over and grabbed her by the collar. "What do you mean?" "What did they bury?" Kayla didn't answer. Instead, the lights exploded. Glass rained down from the fixtures as darkness swallowed the room. Emergency strobes kicked in seconds later, painting everything in harsh red pulses. A synthetic voice rang through the facility. "Warning, containment breach. All sectors on lockdown. Evacuate non-essential personnel." Outside the room, footsteps pounded the hallway. Reyes rushed to the door, peeking through the slot. Armed men in black biohazard suits were moving quickly, sealing blast doors, escorting key researchers out. One of them stopped to look directly at the reinforced viewing window. He lifted his visor and mouthed a single word, "Terminate." Reyes stumbled back. "They're going to kill her." Bishop stared at Kayla, who still hadn't flinched. Her wrists were still chained, but her presence filled the room like smoke. "I don't think that's going to work," Reyes added. Bishop growled and unlocked the restraints. "If we're going to die in here, I want answers first." As the chains hit the floor, Kayla stood. She was tall, maybe 5'10". But the way she moved made her seem larger, deliberate, like a force of nature in human form. Her gaze settled on the mirrored glass at the far end of the room. She lifted one hand and touched it gently. On the other side, Dr. Elira Nix watched, expression unreadable. The mirror began to fog from Kayla's touch, even though it was shatterproof plexiglass. Elira whispered to the tech beside her. "She's activating again." "Ma'am, should we engage the fire suppression?" "No," Elira said. "We observe." Kayla spoke without turning. "You remember, don't you, Doctor? The tunnels. The incident. The girl who walked out of fire." Elira's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't heard that voice in over 20 years. Not since the Siberian detonation, the so-called Uric event. Only one survivor had been recorded. And the footage had been locked under top-tier clearance. But Elira had seen it. A child, no older than 6, walking barefoot through a chemical fire, eyes glowing faintly under a curtain of soot. Kayla. In the room, Kayla took another step toward the mirror. "You shouldn't have brought me back here." Elira steadied herself. "We didn't. You were found near the perimeter. You came back on your own." Kayla smiled. "Not entirely." Suddenly, the walls began to tremble. A crack formed in the ceiling tile above Bishop's head. Concrete dust rained down. Reyes cursed. "Structural breach!" Kayla closed her eyes again. This time, the vibration wasn't mechanical. It wasn't something the facility could control. It was something underneath. Something forgotten. "The fire isn't just in me," Kayla said softly. "It was part of a trial, a layered compound. You think it failed because everyone else died, but you didn't understand." Her hand lifted toward the ceiling. It was meant to awaken only one. Bishop raised his gun again, more an instinct than threat. The floor beneath them lurched. Not an explosion, not a collapse, a pulse. Deep and living. Kaila's skin shimmered faintly in the red light. Not glowing, rippling, like heat mirage over skin. But there was no heat, only a kind of warping. Reyes stumbled against the wall. This isn't human. Kaila turned to face him. It never was. Another pulse surged through the facility, and this time the sound that followed wasn't mechanical. It was a scream. Not human, but not alien either. Something trapped for too long. Something ancient, rising from the deep. From the surveillance bay, Alira's assistant muttered, "There's something under sub-level 9. Alira's face went pale. There shouldn't be. But there was. Kaila had brought it with her, not physically but biologically. She was a carrier, a signal, a flame made flesh. She'd returned to finish what the fire started, and the silo had just become her crucible. It wasn't just a tremor, it was a heartbeat. Reyes could feel it beneath the soles of his boots. Steady, living, and impossibly deep. Something below them was alive. Not in the way humans were, not even in the way machines mimicked life. This was ancient, rhythmic, elemental. And Kaila was somehow in tune with it. Bishop backed away from her slowly, gun still drawn, his fingers tight around the grip. "What are you? A weapon? A clone? Some freak of bioengineering?" Kaila turned toward him, her skin still shimmering in waves, the ripple of heat distortion bending light without a source. "I'm what you created by mistake," she said, "and what you buried out of fear." From behind the one-way glass, Dr. Alira Nix stared in disbelief. The girl she had last seen being wheeled out on a stretcher 2 decades ago had returned in the body of a woman who hadn't aged properly, hadn't scarred, hadn't broken. Kaila wasn't the same species anymore. And worse, she might not be the only one. "Lock down sub-levels 8 through 10, Alira barked into the comms. "Seal the geothermal vents. I want everything under her contained." Her technician hesitated. "Ma'am, vent 10 is active. There's heat pressure building. We're getting spikes in." "I don't care," Alira snapped. "Shut it down." Inside the interrogation room, Kaila exhaled a slow breath, and the air warped around her like a lens. The mirror behind her began to crack. Not from impact, but from heat, despite no flame being present. The glass didn't shatter. It melted. Bishop flinched as the edge of the mirror began to drip. "This is insane." Reyes stepped between him and Kaila. "She hasn't attacked us. She could have. But she hasn't. Maybe we should listen." "Listen to what?" Bishop barked. "Some cryptic science fiction monologue while the entire facility turns into a volcano?" Kaila ignored them. Her eyes were closed again, her pulse visibly thrumming beneath her skin. "It's remembering me now," she murmured. "The thing you tried to forget. You buried it under concrete, under silence, but you didn't kill it. You couldn't." A third pulse hit the structure. The lights burst. Not from power failure, from heat. Emergency fluorescence above their heads exploded like overripe fruit, showering sparks across the floor. From overhead, the announcement system came online again. "Warning! Core containment breach detected in geothermal vaults. Evacuation mandatory. Countdown initiated. T-minus 18 minutes. Bishop turned pale. "There's a geothermal vault under this place?" Kaila opened her eyes. "Not just geothermal." Alira, watching from the control room, clenched her jaw. "What did we leave down there?" Her assistant scrolled through decades-old blueprints on a flickering screen. "There's something listed under the original construction records. A thermal sinkhole that couldn't be sealed off. They called it the Scar. It was supposed to be inert." Alira's eyes narrowed. They lied. Kaila had begun to walk now, slowly, gracefully toward the sealed door. Not running, not panicked, just moving like someone who already knew what came next. Reyes hesitated. "Where are you going?" "To the Scar," she said. "I need to wake the rest of it." Bishop aimed his weapon. "Over my dead body." Kaila turned to him and her expression changed. Not angry, not sad, almost pitying. "That's the plan." Suddenly, the floor erupted behind her. Not an explosion, an emergence. A crack tore across the tiles, glowing with radiant orange light. From the chasm came not flame, but a howl. An echo that sounded like voices stacked together, calling across time and pressure. Reyes fell back, shielding his face from the blast of heat. Bishop fired instinctively, but the bullet never reached her. It warped midair, twisting and disintegrating as if the very air around her bent space. Kaela stepped into the glow. Reyes reached out. "Kaela, stop! If you go down there..." She turned once more. "It won't stop unless I do. You tried to burn me, but all you did was stoke the furnace." Then she stepped into the crack and vanished. Bishop rushed to the edge, peering down into the glowing chasm. What he saw wasn't just rock or lava or fire. It was movement. Structures buried in molten sediment, shapes that didn't make sense. Curves and lines like bones from something fossilized and forgotten, but not dead. From the control room, Illyra whispered, "My God, it's a chamber." "Not a chamber," the assistant muttered. "A womb." Then, as the countdown echoed again overhead, the scar answered. And the heat wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that it was breathing. The scar wasn't a crack. It was a mouth. Beneath the floor of the silo, where concrete met ancient stone, Kaela had descended into something that wasn't man-made. It had veins. It had heat. It pulsed with a rhythm too precise for geology, and too vast for biology. The deeper she went, the more it felt like walking inside a living memory, one that had waited centuries to be stirred. Up above, panic had replaced protocol. Dr. Illyra Nix stood frozen in the control room, her reflection warped in the melting plexiglass. Technicians scrambled around her, shouting over one another, but the only thing she could focus on was the words still lingering in her ears. Womb! Something about it rang too close to the classified files she had once sworn never to open again, something about the way Kaela spoke. The calm, the knowledge. It wasn't just rebellion or vengeance, it was return. "Seal off sub-level 10, Illyra barked. "Already collapsed," one tech shouted back. "We lost contact with structural supports. Seismic readings are inconsistent. They're not tectonic. They're rhythmic." "Rhythmic how?" He hesitated. Like a heartbeat." Meanwhile, Bishop and Reyes had fled the interrogation chamber, alarms screeching above them. Half the corridors were on fire from ruptured circuits, and the emergency generators were beginning to fail. They moved toward the upper levels, but Bishop kept glancing over his shoulder like something unseen was following them. "She's not human," Bishop said. Reyes was panting, burned slightly from the floor eruption. "Maybe not entirely, but she's not your enemy either." Bishop turned. "She walked into a sub-level breach like it was home, Reyes. You don't do that unless you're part of what's down there." Reyes stared at him, then said quietly, "Maybe she is. But that doesn't mean she wants what they want." Bishop narrowed his eyes. "They?" But he didn't get an answer. Because below them, inside the scar, Kaela had reached the edge of the impossible. She stood on a ledge of glassy obsidian, facing what looked like the inside of an enormous ribcage, fused with earth, pulsing with a slow, alien glow. It was fossilized, yet alive. There were glyphs etched into the walls that no living civilization had ever recorded, and in the center of it all was a core. It hovered above the ground like a molten heart, threads of light suspended from its sides like veins. Kaela stepped toward it, barefoot now. Her skin shimmered, but no longer from heat, from resonance. Her presence activated it. The walls began to react, glowing where her body passed, pulsing in time with her breath. The core itself vibrated, sending tremors up through the entire facility. Illyra clutched the desk for balance as another pulse rattled the upper levels. "What is she doing?" The tech looked at her with horror. "Ma'am, it's syncing with her." Like it recognizes her biology. Reyes, now inside the access elevator trying to override the lockdown, saw his panel flicker. The screen glitched, then began displaying symbols, circles within circles, interlocked like DNA strands spinning through time. He didn't recognize the pattern. But Kaela did. The memories were returning in flashes. She remembered the pain of the experiments, the fire, the blood, and the betrayal. But before that, she remembered things no child should. Ancient skies, a language that wasn't spoken, but transmitted. A fall from orbit wrapped in light. She hadn't just survived the Uric event. She had been born from it. Her body was a container, not a mistake. The blowtorch, the fire, the experiments, they had only peeled back the outer layer. The anomaly Project Halo had been trying to destroy wasn't a failure. It was hibernating. Until now. She placed her hand against the core. And it opened. Up above, every sensor on every panel flatlined. Then, one by one, they lit up again, but this time not with data. With symbols, pulses, messages. Elira's screen showed a single word repeating in red, translated crudely through the ancient linguistics AI they once used for decoding alien transmissions recovered from failed probes. Awakening. A low rumble started at the bottom of the facility and rolled upward like a wave. Concrete cracked, steam hissed from broken vents. The metal walls warped outward, as if the silo itself was being exhaled. Inside the scar, Kaila's hair floated as though underwater. The core poured light into her palms, then her chest, then her eyes. She opened her mouth and spoke in a voice that hadn't been heard on Earth in 10,000 years. The womb had opened, and Mother had returned. Long before Kaila Dorn walked barefoot into the scar, before her skin resisted fire and her blood carried memory, there was Project Halo, a buried chapter in the history of human experimentation so secret it was erased from every database that mattered. And yet, pieces remained. Fragments of footage, scans, genetic anomalies that never matched with any known species. Elira Nix had been a junior analyst then, fresh out of neurogenetic grad school, assigned to incident observation in a Siberian off-grid facility. The files were labeled benign, cryogenic trauma recovery testing. But they weren't testing recovery. They were trying to awaken something. She remembered the heat, not external, internal. Infants whose vitals surged when exposed to flame. Toddlers who healed from surgical incisions in seconds. And one girl, left in the fire longer than any of them. Kaila. The girl who didn't scream. Elira's eyes flicked toward the emergency monitors now lighting up around her. Her techs were trying to contain the event, but none of the models applied. They were used to breaches, uprisings, even rogue biotech. But this was resonance on a planetary scale. We're not watching a disaster, Elira said quietly. We're watching a signal return to its source. Below them, inside the scar, Kaila floated above the glowing core. The symbols around her spun faster, aligning like gears, and with every pulse, she absorbed more of the heat. It no longer shimmered against her. It poured into her veins like fuel. In her mind, voices spoke in patterns, not words, not commands, memories, visions of others like her, hidden in cryopods across the world. Halo hadn't just tested her. They had divided her essence, seeded it into others, hoping to harness it before it matured. But they were wrong. She wasn't a product of Project Halo. She was its origin, a prototype from somewhere far older, far beyond. Kaila opened her eyes and her irises flickered like the sun seen through smoke. She spoke again, and this time her voice echoed not just in the chamber, but through the entire silo. You tried to break me, but all you did was scatter the flame. The scar responded. Veins of light exploded through the walls of the lower facility, crawling upward like roots made of fire. Entire sublevels lost pressure. Ceiling tiles burst. Reinforced doors bent outward as if repelled by some invisible force. Reyes, gripping the rails of the emergency lift, stared in awe. This isn't destruction. Bishop stumbled next to him. It's rebirth. They had both seen combat, bloodshed, and human experimentation up close. But nothing had prepared them for what it felt like when the walls started humming in harmony, when the metal of the silo sang back to the core like a tuning fork. Inside the control room, Elira was already accessing deep archives, files she was once forbidden to even mention. And in one folder marked circa prototype.d4a/Genesis Flame, she saw the image of a child suspended in fire, smiling. Kaila, she whispered, you weren't an anomaly, you were the blueprint. Suddenly, the room's main console locked, screens went black. And then one word appeared, pulsing with the countdown timer. Unify. It wasn't a warning. It was a command. Across the globe, dormant signals began to activate. Old Halo outposts long shut down flickered back to life. Sealed cryochambers lit up in places no satellite had touched in decades. Beneath deserts, inside mountain caves, at the bottom of frozen lakes. They had called Kayala a freak. A burn-proof mistake. But she wasn't alone. And now, one by one, they were waking up. The children of fire. The ones who survived the blast, not because they were immune, but because they were born from it. In the heart of the scar, Keela stood upright on air, glowing from within. She had been their warning. Now she was their beacon. And every torch they'd used to try and destroy her had only lit the way for others. Outside the silo, a storm was rising. But not one made of clouds or wind. This was geological, electrical, ancestral. The mountain that hid the silo trembled, and the surrounding forest ignited along the fault lines. But the fire wasn't consuming the trees. It was following a pattern, spreading in perfect symmetry, carving runes into the land itself. Villagers in the valley below stared upward, mouths agape as a halo of flame coiled around the peak. Phones died. GPS froze. Birds flew in spirals until they dropped from the sky. Something was rewriting nature. And Kayla Dorn was its voice. Down in the scar, her feet finally touched the obsidian floor. The core behind her now pulsed softly, its light dimming, not because it was failing, but because it had given what it needed to give. She wasn't the same. Not Kayla Dorn, not D4A, not Subject Genesis. Now she was the memory carrier. In her veins flowed not blood but legacy, a strand of encoded flame passed from a species that had once tried to guide Earth's evolution and been hunted into extinction. That legacy had waited, buried in children, torn apart, studied, burned. But flame does not forget. Above, in the shattered control room, Alira Nix watched the facility map flicker violently. Sublevel 10 was gone. Consumed or transformed. The scar was now reading as a biosignature 10 times larger than the girl who had entered it. But this wasn't just biological, it was informational. "What's happening to her?" Reyes said, arriving breathless beside her. Elira didn't answer at first. She stared at the blinking red indicator on her screen, the word unify flashing like a drumbeat. Then she turned. She's becoming the neural core of something older than the human genome, a signal, a living archive. That's why fire doesn't hurt her. It's how she communicates. It's her medium. Reyes looked down toward the fractured sublevels. "You're saying she's transmitting?" "I'm saying," Alara replied, "she's remembering things we were never meant to know." Suddenly, the screens went white. All of them. Not black, white. And a voice, not from speakers, but through the minds of every living person in the facility, spoke a single phrase. "The ashes remember." Reyes clutched his head. Bishop dropped to a knee, teeth gritted. Elira backed against the wall, eyes wide, as if her very soul had been touched. It wasn't pain. It was total recall. Visions flooded their minds. A civilization made of heat and language, not steel and guns. Creatures who sculpted atmosphere the way we sculpt stone. Cities alive with radiant knowledge. And then, fire raining from the sky, tearing it all apart. Not war. Erasure, Reyes gasped. "They weren't invaders." "No," Elira whispered. "They were guardians. We killed them." "And what remained?" Kayla. The last ember. That's why the blowtorch hadn't marked her. It was like trying to burn fire with fire. And now, the very thing that made her a test subject had made her a transmitter of the old language. The memory carrier. In the scar, Kayla raised her hands and the ground answered. From the cracked walls, others began to stir. At first, they looked like shadows. Then like people. Children. Teens. Men and women suspended in glass, covered in ash and data tattoos, hidden in the walls like seeds waiting for heat to bloom. Halo hadn't just stored her essence. They'd tried to recreate it. Kayla stepped toward the nearest pod and touched it gently. It opened. A girl, no older than 10, fell into her arms, breathing hard, her body radiating a faint warmth. Kayla cradled her close. "You're safe now." One by one, the forgotten children began to awaken. In the control room, Bishop stumbled backward. "We have to shut it down. We have to nuke the mountain if we have to." Reyes shoved him against the wall. "Shut it down? You're the reason this happened. You lit the match, and now you want to blame the fire." Elira stepped between them. "No, we don't stop it. We listen, because what's coming next isn't war." She turned back to the screens, watching as dozens of biosigns registered across the sublevels. It's return. And for the first time in history, Earth wasn't just remembering what it had buried. It was remembering who it had burned. Arya didn't know what compelled her to check the backdoor surveillance logs of the hostel again. She had reviewed them a dozen times, pausing, zooming, pixel-enhancing every inch of the static-filled footage. But something about tonight was different. The date and time stamped at the top right corner blinked erratically. It was the exact moment she had passed out in the alley 3 nights ago. Her finger hovered over the play icon. She clicked. The camera flared with interference, a hiss of white noise crackling through her headphones. Then it cleared, for a single frame. And that was all it took. There she was, standing at the alley's mouth, blood-stained, breathing heavy. But not alone. Behind her, in the shadow, was a figure. A woman, hair tied back, a long coat, and eyes that burned into the lens like they saw through it. The woman looked straight into the camera and smiled. Arya froze. That face. It shouldn't exist. Not anymore. It had been on the missing persons board in their village 15 years ago. And then, in the casualty logs after the fire, her mother, Dr. Alyssa Vole, pronounced dead, declared insane before she vanished. But this footage showed her alive and watching. Suddenly, everything Arya had believed twisted into a question mark. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. She had been there, watching from the dark. Why? Arya scrubbed forward in the footage. More glitches. Then another burst of clarity. The woman knelt beside Arya's collapsed form in the alley and whispered something inaudible to the camera's mic. But Arya could read her lips. One word. Remember. Arya's hands shook as she leaned back, adrenaline crashing into confusion. She remembered the night of the fire. She remembered screams. Hands dragging her into a tunnel. A needle. Darkness. And then, nothing. What if those lost years weren't trauma-induced? What if they were erased? Before she could process more, a knock at the door snapped her back into the present. It was Father Lorne. His usually calm expression was pale. "You need to see something," he said, holding up a thick envelope marked in faded Vatican red. Inside were classified files. Not just about her, but about something called Project Delta. And at the top of the report, status, reactivation imminent, target, Arya Vole. Her mother's name. Her name. They weren't just remnants of a broken family. They were keys in a machine that never stopped turning. And someone had just flipped the switch. Arya's voice was hollow when she spoke. "Take me to the place they burned the others." Lorne didn't ask how she knew. He simply nodded. Because deep down, he had always known she'd ask. And deep down, she already remembered. She wasn't just running from her past anymore. She was about to enter it. And it was waiting for her. They traveled at dusk. Father Lorne drove a battered black Renault, its engine wheezing up the serpentine backroads of northern Lyria's forest ridge. Arya sat silent in the passenger seat, the file folder open across her knees. Every page was more surreal than the last. Subject 9, Arya Vole. Biological anomalies began at age 6. First pain resistance incident recorded after exposure to controlled thermal trauma. Quote, she didn't remember it, but her body did. Each sentence unlocked a phantom ache, a memory that throbbed beneath the skin but never rose to the surface. Lorne spoke quietly. It was called the Delta Convergence Protocol, officially shut down, unofficially, too successful to bury. "Why would the church be involved?" she asked, her voice low. "We weren't," he said. "Not all of us. A splinter faction used our seal. A rogue order within the Vatican Sciences Division, operating out of old ruins beneath Lyria's oldest abbey. They believed in a new form of evolution, one guided through pain." Arya looked at her reflection in the window, at the calm eyes she no longer recognized. "They wanted to build a weapon," she said. "No," Lorne corrected. "They wanted to build a bridge." That word echoed. Not a weapon. A bridge. But between what? An hour later, they reached the monastery. The air was thick, with the scent of pine needles and burnt stone. The building had long since collapsed, left to rot after a fire gutted it 20 years ago. The stone archways still bore Latin inscriptions. Per dolorem lux. Through pain, light. Arya ran her fingers along the charred stone as they stepped inside. Lorne led her down a side corridor, behind a crumbling mosaic of the Madonna and Child. He pressed on one tile. It clicked. Stone slid, and a hidden stairwell opened beneath their feet. As they descended, the air grew colder, damper. Arya's lungs tightened. The walls here were smooth, not ancient. Industrial. Reinforced steel doors lined the hall, each marked with numerical codes and faded handprints in ash. Then they reached the chamber. It was a dome, metallic, humming faintly with residual electricity. At the center was a gurney, scorched. Straps melted. And beside it, 7 urns, each labeled Subject 1, Subject 2, Subject 3, until Subject 8. No, Subject 9. Arya stepped forward, trembling. Suddenly, the hum in the room intensified. A panel slid open on the far wall. A screen lit up. Static. Then, her mother's face appeared. Not live. A recording. "Hello, Arya," Alyssa said calmly, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "If you're seeing this, then they've restarted the convergence." Arya's knees went weak. She gripped the gurney for balance. "I tried to stop them. I tried to take you away." But they were faster, smarter, more desperate. Alyssa looked over her shoulder as though expecting to be found. "You were different from the others. Your body healed too fast. Your nerve receptors adapted. Pain became an input, not a punishment." A pause. "Remember when you used to hum when you got fevers? That wasn't just comfort. It was your brain releasing suppressive signals, training you to override suffering. They didn't realize it then, but I did." Arya clenched her jaw. "I burned you," Alyssa whispered on the screen, "to get you out." Arya gasped. "The day of the fire, I faked the facility explosion, used thermite laced with hallucinogens to cover your escape. You screamed, but your skin never marked." Behind the camera, someone shouted. Alyssa looked panicked. "I don't know if I'll make it out, but you have to finish what they started, not the project, the truth. They're calling you back because your biology is the missing link. But they don't know. You're more than just science. You're the key." The screen went black. Silence. Only the hum of dead electricity remained. Arya turned to Lorne. "I need to know everything about Project Delta, every scientist, every subject, every facility." He nodded. "There's one last site," he said. "The one no one returned from." Arya stepped toward the exit. The gurney behind her creaked once, as if something unseen shifted on it. She didn't look back. Her mother hadn't died in vain. And now they would all learn what happened when a forgotten weapon remembered she had a soul and a purpose. The room was colder than death, not because of the temperature, but because of the memories embedded in its walls. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, revealing a chamber lined with rusted surgical equipment and a metal chair that looked more like a torture device than a seat. A faint smell of antiseptic clung to the air, but beneath it was something fouler, something that smelled like burned hair, scorched flesh, and years of pain. This was where they had taken her years ago. And now, with her captors forcing her back inside, Elira was about to relive what they assumed she'd buried. A new man stood over her now, tall, clean-shaven, with mirrored glasses that made him look less human and more like a machine. He didn't speak when the guards strapped her down. He simply nodded and scribbled notes on a clipboard, like she was a test subject, not a woman. Elira's wrists bled where the cuffs cut into her skin, but her face remained unreadable. She had promised herself they would never see her scream again. "They call you the one who cannot burn," the man finally said, voice flat. "But everything has a melting point." He signaled to someone behind the mirrored glass. A mechanical arm descended from the ceiling. A blowtorch clamped at the end like some grotesque surgical tool. The flame ignited, humming low and lethal. Elira didn't flinch. "You remember what this is?" the man continued. "We used to call it the Awakener." Of course she remembered. The first time they used it, she'd been 13. The pain had been otherworldly. The smell of her own flesh cooking had haunted her dreams. But then something changed. Her skin healed too fast. The nerve stopped responding like normal human tissue. The scientists at Compound Zarinth didn't understand it then. And they still didn't now. But instead of fearing it, they grew obsessed. Elira closed her eyes as the flame drew close. She remembered the days they tested her endurance, submerging her in chemical baths, exposing her to radiation, forcing her to stand barefoot on superheated metal plates. Each test designed to break her. But something in her wouldn't allow it. Her body became an anomaly, regenerating, resisting. It wasn't invincibility. It was something deeper, stranger. The fire kissed her shoulder. The smell rose. The scientists leaned forward, waiting for screams. There were none. The skin beneath the flame shimmered, not blistered, not red, but glowing slightly, like it had absorbed the heat and metabolized it. "She's accelerating," one voice whispered from behind the glass. "The response time is down again. We're missing something. This isn't just a mutation." Elira's mind drifted, not because she wasn't present, but because she'd trained herself to fragment the pain. One part of her focused on their movements, their terminology, the technology they thought she didn't understand. The other part, hidden and silent, was already formulating escape. She had to endure this final phase. Because beyond this room, beyond these walls, someone was coming. She felt it. She remembered a name, Orin. The last man who'd tried to save her. Who had disappeared. Who she believed was dead. But now she wasn't so sure. The man with the mirrored glasses leaned closer. "Where does it go?" he asked her. "The heat. Where does it disappear to? Are you storing it or converting it?" She didn't answer. Because the truth was, she didn't entirely know either. But lately, when she closed her eyes, she saw something. Flares, bursts of light, a sun inside her. Energy building, storing, waiting. And she was starting to realize something terrifying. One day, that energy might explode. And everyone who tried to control her would regret ever lighting that first match. The guards didn't see it coming. One moment, Elira sat strapped to the chair, head down, skin seemingly inert. The next, the lights flickered. Not the usual flicker of bad wiring, but something else. An electromagnetic pulse, subtle, felt first in the bones before it was seen in the air. The blowtorch snapped off. The monitor screens crackled with static. And then, everything went dark. Panic set in behind the mirrored glass. "Reboot! Reboot now!" "She's triggering something. This wasn't in the parameters." The mirrored glasses man turned, face no longer composed. But by then, it was too late. Elira's eyes opened. They glowed. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. Physically, lit from within, as if they carried their own solar core. And the cuffs holding her wrists? They hissed. Then cracked. Metal twisted away from her like it was repelled by her very blood. She stood slowly as the shadows around the room warped in reaction to the heat exuding from her skin. The cameras melted in place. The glass window between her and the observers curved and fogged from the inside. Still, she said nothing. Still, she didn't scream. Instead, she reached to the wall, touched it, and the steel surface began to bubble and drip like wax. That was when the first man broke protocol and opened the security door, barreling in with a tranq gun. She let him come, let him believe it might work. He fired. The dart hit her shoulder. She yanked it out without pause, crushed it between two fingers, and whispered, "You're a decade too late." Her voice was low, not angry, but resonant. It vibrated in the floor tiles. Another man pulled the emergency fire suppression lever, desperate to contain her. The foam blasted down. Freezing mist, Helen gas. Everything designed to quell fire. It did nothing. In fact, it made her brighter. Her skin shimmered golden, casting reflections on the white walls. She moved forward. One step. Another. The reinforced titanium door sealed shut, just as she reached it. But they didn't understand yet. The fire wasn't just inside her. It was under her control. She placed her palm on the door, closed her eyes, and the door didn't melt, it atomized. A flash of blue-white light, a sound like collapsing stars, then silence. When the smoke cleared, the door was gone, vaporized. On the other side stood 24 soldiers, armed with energy rifles and riot-grade shields. "On the ground," one of them shouted. Elira tilted her head. Then, without a single move, the temperature in the corridor rose by 30 degrees. The guards flinched. Sweat dripped. She walked toward them, and the air around her bent, distorted by the heat signature of her steps. One man opened fire. The bullet curved mid-air, spiraled, then melted before it ever touched her. She raised one hand and whispered, "No more cages." A pulse rippled from her chest. Not an explosion. A silent wave. The soldiers collapsed where they stood, unconscious, not dead. She hadn't come to destroy, only to escape, and to find the others, the ones still trapped. Because this place, Compound Xerinth, wasn't just about her. It had hundreds more, each with a different experiment, each with pain carved into their bones. She would be the fire that walked through their walls and turned their prison into ash. Elira didn't need directions, not in the way others did. The moment she stepped beyond the corridor of collapsed soldiers, her veins began to pulse, not just with blood, but with memory. Embedded deep in her biology was a hidden lattice, a sequence that wasn't genetic, but engineered. It shimmered just beneath her skin like constellations rearranging themselves. Every heartbeat was a signal. Every step was a guided path. Down the hall and into a chamber she had never seen, but somehow recognized. A cold air vented from the floor. Frost lined the walls. The air vibrated. Here, the temperature wasn't just a feature of environment, it was controlled by someone else. Someone watching her. She stopped just before the center of the room, looked up, and for the first time she spoke clearly, "I know you're listening." The ceiling shifted, revealing a long-forgotten interface. A synthetic voice responded, female, calm, detached. "You've accessed the core convergence node." "I'm not here by accident," Elira said. "We know," the voice replied, "because we wrote your path in blood." From the ceiling, light descended in a circular beam. It scanned her body. Lines of data ran across the walls, forming a map of the entire compound. Every floor, every sector, every cell. There were hundreds of dots, flickering weakly. Some red, some already dark. Elira clenched her fists. "What are these?" "Others like you, subjects, failures, assets." "No," she whispered. "They're names, people. I remember some of them now." The voice paused. "You are exceeding behavioral projections by 19.2%. "I'm not a projection," she snapped. "I'm a reckoning." Suddenly, a sharp pain lanced through her spine. Not physical. Neurological. The system had activated a dormant inhibitor. Her body tensed. She fell to one knee. But even in agony, her mind kept calculating. The map. The coordinates. Sector 9B. Level SUB-4. That was where the twins were. Jaren and Kale, she remembered now. She'd held Kale's hand when they were dragged apart. Jaren had screamed until his voice vanished. And now they were locked in cryostasis chambers, prisoners of a future they never asked for. The pain in her body peaked, but then dimmed. Her nerves began to burn through the override. Whatever they'd implanted in her, it couldn't hold forever. She stood again, trembling but unbroken. The voice stuttered for the first time. "You are destabilizing core protocol." "I'm not destabilizing," she said, stepping into the light beam. "I'm reprogramming." She extended her arms, and from her forearms, lines of light traced upward, symbols etched in heat and memory. The beam flickered, then pulsed. And the system listened. Alarms flared briefly, then fell silent. Locks across multiple sectors disengaged. Cryo doors opened. Gas hissed from ancient chambers. And hundreds of eyes opened for the first time in years. The voice, once omnipotent, sounded smaller now. "You don't understand what they'll do to you once you leave this facility." "They already did it," Elira said, eyes blazing. "Now I'm doing it back." She turned, heading for Sector 9B, the map glowing faintly beneath her skin. She moved faster now. Every door she passed tried to seal, but the walls bent to her heat signature, opening instead. Lights flared red, then white, then died altogether. The facility was beginning to wake in the worst way, not from its design, but from the wrath it had forged in its own victims. When she reached the cryo wing, she found the twins. Still frozen. Still small, but alive. Her hand hovered over the release panel. For a second, she hesitated, afraid her touch might burn them. Then Kale opened his eyes and smiled. "Elira," he whispered through fogged glass. "We knew you'd come." She pressed her hand to the chamber. No more waiting. With a hiss, the pods opened. Their breath returned. Their skin flushed with color. And for the first time since they were children, they were free. Behind them, other chambers stirred. Others would wake. Others would rise. And she would lead them. Because she didn't just have a map. She was the map. And they had carved the path of their own undoing directly into her veins. Somewhere above the sublevels, in the control tower buried beneath 20 feet of steel and paranoia, a man watched the screens flicker to static. His name was Director Ren Vosh. And for 12 years, he had controlled everything within Compound Greywake. Every breath monitored. Every scream logged. Every deviation cataloged and neutralized. Until now. "She's corrupted the convergence protocol," the technician stammered beside him, fingers flying across keys that no longer responded. "The neural grid's offline. We've lost cryo integrity. Sector 9B's unlocked." "I can see that," Vosh snapped, eyes narrowing at the static-covered monitor where Elira's silhouette flickered like a ghost. "What do we do?" another asked. "Activate the purge?" Vosh didn't answer immediately. He stared at Elira's final recorded position. At the heat signature rising behind her, dozens of formerly frozen subjects awakening one by one. They were children when they were taken. Now they were something else entirely. And she was their axis. "The command chain is compromised," Vash muttered. "But the old failsafe still function. Prep the pulse grid." The room went silent. Even the guards hesitated. "The pulse grid, sir?" one whispered. "That'll collapse the entire south wing. We'll lose the archive, possibly the twins." Vash's eyes burned cold. Collateral. Down below, Elira held Kale and Jaren close, but she already felt the shift in pressure. The walls around them began to hum with a subharmonic frequency, a low, building vibration, like a god drawing breath. She knew that sound. It had nearly ended her once. She had 7 seconds to decide. Run, and maybe save herself. Or try to override it, and risk losing everything. Kale looked up at her, eyes still blurry from stasis. "What's that noise?" "It's a command," she whispered, "designed to erase everything I just did." "Can you stop it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped into the center of the room and dropped to her knees. She reached out, not with her hands, but with memory. With the implanted thread of tech they'd left buried in her spinal cord, thinking it would control her. They had no idea it would connect her. To everything. The pulse grid came online. Its countdown started at 5. The twins watched as the room began to shake. Jaren grabbed her arm. "Elira." "Shh," she whispered. "Listen with me." 4. Her breath slowed. 3. Her heart aligned with the grid's rhythm. 2. She reached into the system, not like a hacker. Like a mother waking up a broken machine with a lullaby. 1. Override accepted. The pulse grid died mid-command. Lights snapped off, then came back with a new hue. Brighter, warmer, alive. The compound had just lost its leash. In the tower above, alarms screamed. The technician paled. "She rewrote the pulse signal. Sir, she owns the grid now." Vash's fists clenched. "Then activate Project Lazarus, now!" The room flinched. Project Lazarus was a myth. A whispered last resort buried beneath ethics and firewalls. But Vash no longer cared. If Elira wanted to walk as a god through his corridors, then he would raise a devil to meet her. Below, as Elira led the twins down a newly opened corridor, her skin prickled. Something had changed. Not a shutdown. Not defense. A summoning. She turned a corner and froze. The wall ahead didn't exist on any map. It was new. And standing in front of it was her. But not quite. Taller. Eyes black. Body riddled with metallic veining like veins filled with mercury. Elira? No, not Elira. A copy. A fallback. Built from her blood and enhanced with everything the scientists couldn't control in her. Project Lazarus had been made in case she ever turned rogue. It had waited in darkness. Now, it was free. The clone tilted its head. Original vessel detected. Elira stepped forward, shielding Kale and Jaren behind her. "You don't belong here." The clone smiled. "Neither do you." Then it moved. Faster than any soldier. Stronger than any agent. But Elira didn't retreat. She ran to meet it, because this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about ending the people who had tried to weaponize love and loyalty. And when they tried to command her, they forgot one thing. Elira had already rewritten the rules. The elevator doors slammed shut, but not before Dara saw the look on Colonel Myrna's face, part terror, part awe. That same man who ordered her stripped and strapped to the iron slab was now barking orders from behind reinforced glass, as if the silence in the chamber below could no longer be trusted. 2 levels down, hidden beneath 7 layers of concrete, Dara stood barefoot in a blackened testing room, scorched by every attempt to destroy her. And in her hands, a small silver disc pulsed, a relic retrieved from the ruins of Protocol Ember. It wasn't a weapon, it was a memory vault, one only she could open. A hidden voice, synthetic but humanized, echoed through the chamber from the intercom above. "Final override test. Initiate Stage 7 combustion." Someone in the control room was still clinging to procedure. Still pretending they were in control. Dara exhaled slowly and lowered the disc to the floor. She didn't move as the flame canisters hissed into readiness from all sides. 40 nozzles. liquid plasma accelerant. Temperatures designed to melt titanium. But they weren't designed for her. The ignition triggered. The flames detonated into the room like a dragon's breath, violent, blinding, absolute. For 40 full seconds, she vanished within it, no longer visible through any of the infrared or spectral sensors. Readouts glitched. Surveillance monitors blinked with static. Then, silence. When the smoke cleared, she was still standing. Her clothes had been reduced to ash, but her skin was flawless, untouched, radiant even. Her veins glowed faintly like threads of molten light under translucent flesh. She opened her eyes. The iris was no longer brown, it shimmered with a ring of white gold heat. In the control room, tech operators backed away from their stations. One dropped his headset, another crossed himself. Colonel Mearns spoke through clenched teeth. "Shut it down." "But sir—" "Shut it down!" Below, Dara didn't need their permission. She knelt beside the disk and pressed her palm to its core. A soft tone chimed, recognizing her neural pattern, and the device bloomed like a metallic flower, releasing a tiny hologram from its center. It wasn't data. It was a face. Her mother. Not the biological one who sold her. The one who raised her in the basement of Lab Echo 7. The technician who risked everything to whisper lullabies through code and teach her how to dream between experiments. The recording began to play. If you're seeing this, it means you've survived them. Good, because what they did to you wasn't just illegal, it was unholy. But they didn't know what you really were. Dara's lips trembled. This wasn't just data, it was a key. You weren't built, you weren't bred, you were born, the voice continued. And long before they knew your name, your body remembered something theirs had forgotten. How to fight back without violence, how to burn without breaking. A cascade of images followed. Schematics, blueprints, DNA strand overlays, and a list of names. Dozens, hundreds. Other test subjects, failed subjects, rejected ones. Buried files erased from public records. They were all gone. She was the last. And she wasn't going to stay hidden any longer. Dara rose, the disk now fused into the floor as if melted into the alloy. Her skin still glowed with that gentle, terrifying warmth. The security feed zoomed in on her face, capturing the expression that made one of the analysts in the booth weep. She wasn't angry. She was ready. In the hallway above, emergency sirens wailed. Not because of her, but because the outer perimeter had just gone dark. Whoever had been watching her wasn't doing it alone anymore. A network had been activated. And somewhere in the darkness, a force moved. Not to rescue her, but to join her. Because the fire hadn't just changed Dara, it had awakened others. Whispers passed from encrypted servers to black market terminals, the phrase repeated like a hymn. She survived the flame, now she becomes it. Colonel Mearns turned to his last operative. "You said she didn't know who she was." The operative, pale and shaking, replied, "No, sir, I said you didn't know who she was." And as the power grid failed, one final recording played across the entire facility, projected on every screen. A girl in flames, smiling. And behind her, a city, waiting to burn down its lies. The chamber they uncovered was older than any of them had imagined. Stone walls lined with obsidian veins. Symbols neither religious nor scientific, but primal, etched in ancient blood and sealed with molten ash. Adira stepped inside without hesitation, the torchlight casting her shadow in twisting, inhuman shapes on the walls. "This was never about pain," she whispered. "It was about containment." Kieran followed, trying to catalog what he saw. "This isn't a laboratory, it's a prison." And she nodded, gaze fixed on the far wall where chains, thick, scorched, ceremonial, hung limp and broken. Etched above them in the same angular carvings was a phrase that chilled him to the marrow. "Do not awaken what burns without flame." A faint hum filled the space, not from machinery, but from Adira herself. The glyphs around her responded, glowing red as if recognizing her presence. The air tightened, the temperature dropped, paradoxical for a place built around fire. Kieran backed away instinctively. "You're triggering it." Adira wasn't blinking. Her skin had begun to emit the same faint bioluminescence they had seen in the footage, only stronger now, more defined. Her outline blurred with heat distortion, but her eyes remained calm. "They thought they created me," she said. "They only uncovered me." From the shadows, Agent Lin emerged. "Then what are you?" Adira turned slowly. "Not what. When?" Before Lin could ask, the symbols pulsed. Stones split, and from behind the wall, something shifted. A second chamber, one filled with cracked pods and burned bone, opened like a mouth. Files buried under ash littered the floor. Kieran picked one up, coughing. It was sealed in polyglass, labeled in military glyphs long since outdated. Inside, photos. The same flame symbols. And a little girl standing amid fire, untouched, grinning. It wasn't Adira. It was dated 1962. Kieran blinked. There were others. Lin stiffened. "How many?" Quote, Adira touched the stone edge, and heat raced up the wall, illuminating row after row of faded faces, etched in obsidian like gravestones, each with a name and a mark. None were crossed out. "I'm not the first," she said, "just the one who woke up." Kieran muttered, "You're not a weapon, you're a warning." Adira turned back to the wall and placed her palm against it. "No," she said softly, "I'm the last door they forgot to lock." Suddenly, alarms blared from Kieran's earpiece, unauthorized energy surges. Above ground, the facility began to quake. Adira's body pulsed with a fiery rhythm and her voice deepened, not artificially, but ancestrally. "They tried to contain me with pain, with steel, with silence." A final tremor shattered the remaining stone seal, and from beyond, a light emerged, not fire, but memory. It painted scenes across the walls, of civilizations extinguished, of bloodlines manipulated, of experiments done under the guise of research. Agent Lin watched, in horror. This wasn't science. Adira looked at her. It was prophecy. And then she stepped forward, not as a prisoner, but as something older than their language. As the last of the Fireborn. Above ground, the world held its breath. Seismic anomalies were registered in multiple countries simultaneously, fault lines pulsed with electromagnetic interference, and satellites blinked out for 7 full seconds. In the lab's control center, Dr. Surev shouted into a dead comm line while red lights flickered across every monitor. "She triggered the anchor seal! Nothing's holding it back now. Shut it down!" But deep below, Adira wasn't stopping. She stood in the glowing ruin of the chamber, arms raised, energy flowing from the walls into her like veins reconnecting to a heart long stilled. Kieran and Lin stood behind her, both transfixed, one with terror, the other with understanding. The walls projected ancient memories now, not holograms, genetic echoes encoded in the very rock. The girl from 1962. The others before her. Burned out, buried, betrayed. Each time they were told they were weapons. Each time the truth was sealed deeper. Adira turned toward them, her voice resonating with something more than sound. "You tried to erase fire by studying its ash." Lin raised her gun, but her hands trembled. "Then tell me what you are." Quote, Adira's body split into fractal light for a moment, revealing the skeletal architecture beneath, titanium lattice fused with biocircuitry, laced into flesh grown not in wombs but war zones. Then, calm again, she whispered, "I am the consequence." The chamber collapsed into itself, not an explosion, but a folding inward. Adira rose into the center, surrounded by burning symbols that hovered in air like spinning DNA. Kieran shouted, "We don't have time!" But she looked at him, eyes filled with sorrow and promise. This was never meant to be studied, it was meant to end. And with that she placed both hands on the final glyph, one shaped like a flame crossed with a spiral. The earth groaned, but the sky cleared. From orbit, satellites rebooted. The fault lines fell silent. And in every facility connected to the original experiments, from Siberia to Nevada, systems shut down without warning, files erased, vaults unlocked, labs sterilized by plasma. A global failsafe initiated by something older than the networks running it. Adira had overwritten the source code. not with technology, but blood memory. Kieran collapsed to his knees. Lynn lowered her weapon. And the chamber above them was no longer a prison. It had become a tomb. But not for Adira. For the program. For the hubris. For the pain. When the dust settled days later, a rescue team found them both, alive, changed, and surrounded by ash that no longer burned. Of Adira, there was no trace. Only a scorch mark shaped like a spiral flame, and a line carved into the stone where she stood. Do not create what you will not mourn. In time, they would come to realize she hadn't ended anything. She had merely ignited a future where silence would no longer be mistaken for peace. Where the ones built from pain would rise not as weapons, but as warnings, as voices, as fire. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.